Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us tonight. My name is Katie Cush, and I'm an Alumni Relations Officer at RISD. We're so excited to have you here tonight, and we're so excited to talk about seed starting. With everybody being home and having their gardens, we're getting to that point where we have to start thinking about our spring planting, so it's perfect timing. Before I introduce today's presenter, I would like to go over a few things first. Today's webinar will run roughly about 45 to 50 minutes, leaving us plenty of time at the end for Q&A. So if you have a question, feel free to post it in either the chat section or the Q&A box, and we will address them at the end. I sent out an email this morning with a planting calendar PDF attached. If for some reason you did not receive it, feel free to send me an email and I'll send you a copy. I'll go ahead and I'll put my email address in the chat box so that you have it. And finally, I just ask that you please make sure that your microphones are muted. So at this time, it's my great pleasure to introduce you to tonight's presenter. Vivian Shaw is a lifelong gardener. She started very young with her father, and she has been a master gardener since 2014. Vivian has worked in community gardens, does soil testing and kiosk events, and she works on the URI Master Gardener Hotline. She's currently the Educational Service Co-Coordinator for the Master Gardener Program, in charge of the hotline and soil testing for the state. Over to you, Vivian.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. We're glad you're here tonight. I know that many of you have probably tried seed starting before. Maybe you were successful, maybe you were unsuccessful. I'm hoping after tonight that you give it another try and that you are very successful. Let me just start by saying you Master Gardeners are part of Cooperative Extension, where we want to bring science-based information to all of Rhode Island and southeastern Massachusetts, and we even have people from eastern Connecticut. Cooperative Extension has been around since 1914, and every state has a cooperative extension. They're based in land grant colleges, which URI is. And the Master Gardeners have been focusing on these 5 particular areas. Right now, we are focused on food systems and agriculture for the year. So I hope some of you might be interested in becoming a Master Gardener someday. We have, Katie mentioned, the hotline, which you can contact the hotline and get all of your gardening questions answered. The hotline runs all year round. I have a team right now working every day to answer questions. The big push for a hotline is usually March to October. If you're ever looking for me, I'm on Mondays on the hotline. We have school gardens where Master Gardeners work with teachers and students to grow food in their own school. We have demonstration gardens, soil testing, kiosks, and many, many educational events. So why do you want to start your own seeds? Well, it's less expensive, that's for sure. A packet of seeds you can probably buy for $1, under $2, where a 6-pack of plants might cost you $3, $4, and a packet of seeds will give you 50 to 100 seeds. There's endless varieties. You are in control of the growth. That's kind of one of the big things, especially for people who are organic gardeners. They don't want a lot of chemicals in their plants. And you get an earlier harvest. It's always interesting talking to Master Gardeners in the summertime, who has the first tomatoes. So January is seed catalog month. So if you're interested in seeds, now is the time to purchase your seeds. I would highly recommend Johnny's. It's on the right-hand side, the picture of the catalog. They're from Maine. Their seeds are very good quality. You won't be disappointed in them, and the seeds have a very good yield. So what is a seed? And seed is basically a miniature plant in an arrested state of development. Seeds can last a really long time in this state too. Seeds have been known to be around for thousands of years. Now, the growth requirements are different for a seed than they are for a plant. So you got to be a little mindful of that. What are the parts of a seed? Well, the outside coating is called the seed coat. The endosperm is the food supply that's within the seed coat. The hypocotyl is the little tiny piece of the seed that first opens up and that will eventually produce the roots, or the radicle is the beginning roots. And then you have the cotyledons. So the cotyledons would be in that 1, 2, 3, 4, fifth from the left. Those first tiny leaves, those first true leaves are called the cotyledons. So when you have your seeds, you plant your seeds. When the seed is mature and put in favorable environment to grow, it breaks out of its seed coat, and that's called germination. And that's what you want to start your plants. Germination depends on 3 factors: water, oxygen, and warmth. And depending on the seed, sometimes you need some light for the seeds, but most seeds don't need light. They have a solid seed coat and they don't need light. So water, you need to have a continuous supply of water. Personally, I use distilled water on my seeds. I live in Middletown. We have Newport water. It tends to have a lot of salts in it, which puts like a white crust on top of the soil. I don't really like that, so I use distilled water. It's not necessary. You can use tap water, but the Newport water is not my favorite. Once the germination begins, if your seeds dry, your tiny plants start to dry out, that's going to kill them. You need to continually keep them moist. I recommend a mister. You can buy a simple mister at a dollar store. Just keep the plants moist. I'm going to show you some containers that I use too to keep them covered so that they stay nice and moist. Constant moisture is key for seedlings. Germinated tiny seedlings need oxygen. So in order to break open, and they're going to need some oxygen. Oxygen is needed to convert the carbon, the hydrogen, and the oxygen in the seed into energy. And your growing media should be loosely packed and well aerated. These are baby seeds. The little tiny baby roots need to have a loose growing media. And I don't want to say soil here because you're not going to use soil. You're going to use a growing medium. You don't want to dig up any dirt in your yard or in your vegetable garden or in your flower garden and use that for your seedlings. It's way too compact. And we'll talk about that some more too. And warmth is a factor for germination. So the temperature will affect the percent and speed of germination. So most seeds need 65 to 70 degrees in your growing media, not air temperature in the growing media. Tomatoes and peppers actually like it pretty toasty. They're a little bit pickier. You can use growing mats. So they're basically like an electric heating pad for plants, where you plug it in and it's nice and toasty, and you put your trays on there, and you can set it for a certain temperature and it will help your plants. I personally don't grow tomatoes and peppers from seed. I don't have a huge garden, vegetable garden, so I grow mostly cherry tomatoes or grape tomatoes. So I'm not very picky about my varieties of tomatoes. So I'm happy to buy my tomatoes and peppers from a garden center. But some people are very particular. They want certain varieties of tomatoes. They want certain varieties. They have to have their special hot peppers. So they tend to save seeds from one year to another. That's a whole nother talk. Or, buy their seeds from a garden catalog. But I've heard that you do not have very much luck trying to grow tomatoes and peppers without growing mats. So they're not terribly costly, but they're a little bit costly. I tend to grow a lot of other vegetables, squash and cucumbers and lettuce and other things that can handle a little bit cooler. So you can use the top of your fridge as that can heat up. You can put your seedlings in a furnace room. We'll talk about light in a minute here, but to make sure you're having them, keeping them nice and warm. So let's talk about light. Again, we're still talking about germination here. So some seeds require light to germinate, like impatiens, begonia, lettuce, and petunias. And it'll say that right on the seed packet. We're going to talk more about seed packets in a minute, but it'll say right on the seed packet that it needs light to germinate. But most seeds are not affected by light until germination. So what are some of the other things that you can do to hasten germination? Well, you can pre-germinate them. This is looks like some bean seeds. You can put them between wet paper towels and they'll start to germinate. The seed coat will soften and they'll start to germinate, and you can plant them that way. Some seeds need scarification, which means you have to scratch them to get them to break open. Some of them need a chilling process to encourage germination. Parsley seeds, if you're going to do parsley from seed, it needs a chilling process. Vernalization is the cooling of seeds or plants in order to accelerate flowering. And those are a lot of biennials. For instance, like hollyhocks will need this vernalization. Oops, sorry. So let's get started here. Determine what seeds to start inside and when. So what is that going to look like? We'll go into that in a second. And then you need to know how to read the seed packet. Now, normally I usually give this talk in person, and I have a seed packet for everybody. Unfortunately, I don't have that. We're going to look at a back of a seed packet in a minute, but this is the planting calendar that Katie has put in your email. This is a really, really great resource. It's two-sided, so remember that when you get it in your email, it's two-sided. I just have this one picture up here for the first side. Because I just wanted to go over what some of these codes mean. So CR is plant crown. So you see that asparagus, when you plant asparagus, you use a seed crown, and that takes quite a while. Asparagus is a perennial, and it takes 1 to 2 years before you actually get asparagus. S is for direct sowing in the garden. So you can see like your lima beans, you can start after the 15th, just directly sow them in. T is for transplant. So if you started something indoors, for instance, broccoli, if you started indoors, you can transplant them after May 15th. So the I's are for starting things indoors. So I just wanted to go over that. Oh, and a regular C is plant cloves. So for garlic, you're going to plant cloves directly. And garlic, you plant, it's an interesting plant. You plant it in October. Usually they say plant in at Columbus Day and harvest for 4th of July. That's usually the general rule for planting garlic. And if you've never had fresh garlic that was freshly harvested, it's actually quite yummy. Okay, this is not a particular packet, but it's the back of the seed packet. And there's a lot of information on the seed packet. So it has when to plant. You know, do you plant it indoors? Do you plant it outdoors? How many days to germination? So, you know, I got my seeds and I plant them. It's nice to know when they're supposed to germinate. So I put them in and I got, you know, they're in the soil and I've waited a month and I don't see anything. Well, maybe something didn't happen because maybe your seeds are too old because they didn't germinate. How many days to maturity? And how, if you're going to start them indoors, how many weeks do you need to do that before the last frost? The last frost in Rhode Island is usually May 15th. We've been having quite cool springs lately, so sometimes that can be pushed maybe another extra week or so, but usually they say after May 15th, you're pretty safe. All right, your growing media. This is where I really want you to spend some money. I'm going to give you a lot of tips on things to do really cheaply. Like I told you, buy a mister at the dollar store. It's really cheap and really well effective. But the growing media, please do not buy growing media, seed starting mix at Job Lot. It's a mess. There's not much to it. And I've done it before. I've made the mistake before, so don't make the mistake. I'm an organic gardener. And if you'd like to do organic gardening, I highly recommend Coast of Maine, their organic seed starting mix. It's very loose. It's very light. So again, when I would do this in person, I would put some in a bowl. I will show you how you can saturate it. You want to saturate it, but you don't want it like wringing wet. If you squeeze it, you don't want it wringing wet. You want it moist before you put it in the containers, but you don't want it wringing wet. And you want to make sure it's going to stay warm. So you want to put it, you know, you don't want to do this outside on a January day and bring this growing media back inside. So it's actually, there is no soil in seed starting mix. It's compost and perlite and vermiculite and other materials, peat moss, but there is no actual soil in it. It's nice and light, smells great. So let's talk about containers. One of the things you don't want to do is reuse containers without cleaning them. You want to make sure there's nothing left. You can reuse them, but you want to do a 10% bleached solution to keep them clean. You need to make sure they have holes in the bottom. They need to be able to drain. That's very important. If your media gets really, really wet, you're going to start rotting your plants. So you need your containers large enough for your roots to grow. And doesn't need to be anything fancy. The next slide, I'll show you what I use, but any of these things will work. Any kind of egg cartons, you can, I've grown lettuce. I used to be a teacher and I've started seeds in egg cartons so that kids can take a little lettuce plant and put it in a pot and grow lettuce. But it doesn't have to be anything fancy. You just have to make sure you have holes in the bottom, and you have to set it on a tray or something so that they drain. So this picture on the left is my favorite seed starting container. They're strawberry containers or blueberry containers. I save them throughout the year. The strawberry ones are my favorite because they're really nice and big. Now this one has those 6-pack trays inside the strawberry container. I don't even do that. I just fill it with soil. They have holes on the bottom. The lid acts as a little miniature greenhouse, and I've recycled these containers and they work perfectly. You can also see on the right, if you want to buy something, these things come where you can have little soil pods, and they have a dome on them with, so they create the greenhouse effect. So you've had germination, and now you have your seedlings. So again, these are the seedlings that were in that first picture with the dome. So your seedlings, once the seedlings emerge, you want to take the lid off. You don't need them. Once they emerge, you don't need that greenhouse effect. That was just to have them nice and warm and to get the germination. The picture on the right, you can see the plastic bag. You can do that. You can have them in a tray and put a plastic bag over them. That will also create the greenhouse effect. The big thing is to keep them moist. So again, you don't want this soil compaction. You want them to be damp, but wrung out like a wet sponge. You don't want to soak your seedlings. Now, how you plant your seedlings to what depth is what is going to tell you on the seed packs. So I'm looking at a packet of Cosmos, which is a flower, and it says depth to 1/4 inch. Now, how are you going to measure that? My favorite way to measure that is to use the eraser end of a pencil. I mark what the 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch, whatever it is. I'll mark it on a permanent marker, and then I will just use the end of the pencil, and I'll make my holes in my soil, and then I know where to plant. It will also say how far apart you want to do it. So we want to keep, again, I'm going to keep emphasizing, you want to keep the seedlings moist but not wet. You want to cover them till they emerge. But once you have those cotyledons, those true leaves, you can again lift that lid up or take that tent part off, the greenhouse effect. So this next thing is kind of interesting. So there's a problem when you have things too wet. You can get a fungus called dampening off. And I don't have any scientific background on chamomile tea except that it truly works. You want to brew some chamomile tea, nice and strong, and you want to dilute it to 2 ounces per quart of water. So you brew it pretty strong, and then you dilute it. And then just water your plants that way. So I use, so that I'm not overwatering, what I use is a 1 liter bottle. Again, I buy this seltzer water at Walmart, comes in 1 liter bottles. And I take a drill and I drill 3 tiny holes in the cap. And then I can water my seedlings like that without really soaking them. So that works really well along with misting. So you want to mist, definitely mist when the seedlings are really tiny. Then go to a watering, very light watering, And wicking is when you water from the bottom. So I've done this before. You can set up a whole system where you put down a chamois cloth on the bottom and you set your seeds on it, and then you have a tub of water higher and you wick the water into where the seeds are. Again, it's kind of hard to explain. I usually show that in the demonstration, but you can water from the bottom. That also works. So your seedlings are going to need light. They're going to need lots of light. And if you've really had trouble with seedlings in the past, 99% of the time, it's either overwatering or light, not enough light. Really, seedlings need 12 to 16 hours a day of light. And we just don't have that in February. March is better. If you have a sunroom or anything that you can have a lot of light, a really nice big sunny south window, you can grow seedlings like that. I highly recommend getting some grow lights or some kind of fluorescent lights. There's all kinds of instructional videos on YouTube on how to rig up lights. You can do shop lights on chain systems, but you want the light at first to be nice and close to the plants. So usually I usually do the lights about 2 to 4 inches away from the tops of the plants. And as the plants grow, I keep raising the lights. So I personally did purchase a grow light system that I have the lights on a timer, but it's, that's not absolutely necessary. I've seen many home built light setups that work very, very well. So once you have your seedlings and you have your true leaves, and now you're getting a second set of leaves and maybe a third set of leaves, now you need to start fertilizing. You don't want to start fertilizing until you have the second set of leaves. First set of leaves are the cotyledons. The second set of leaves are called true leaves. So you want to read the instructions on fertilizer. Now think these are babies, so you don't want to be using full strength on these seedlings. So fertilizer is 3 things: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. So you want to make sure when you fertilize, you want to fertilize right at the soil level. You don't want to be soaking those leaves with fertilizer. They could get burned. Now what I do, I'm an organic gardener, so I use fish emulsion. Some people are totally turned off by fish emulsion. It does really smell badly, but yeah, I think it works really well. Fish emulsion is a 5-1-1, 5 nitrogen, 1 phosphorus, 1% potassium. I think it's really great for seedlings, and I've had very, very good luck with it. Whatever it says for full strength, I dilute it to half strength and do that weekly. So I want to do that really, really carefully, and I just do a light watering with that. Yeah, again, I make one of my 1 liter bottles, just half strength of the fish emulsion mixture, and I just will lightly water them once a week, so I'm not over fertilizing them. Now this is the part that people don't want to do. You have a nice tray, you have all these baby seedlings, you've gotten all these, but you have to thin them. And not a lot of people don't want to do this part. They're like, but I want to have all of them. But eventually they're going to be competing with each other, and you really need to do that. So I'm not sure exactly what plants this picture is, but for instance, my Cosmos packet says you need to thin to 8 to 10 inches. So you're not going to get a lot of plants in one of these trays for 8 to 10 inches, but you don't want to pull them. You want to cut them. So what I usually do is I get a little tiny scissors and I just cut them. I save the biggest ones and I save a few extra just in case I lose some. I might save a few extra, but you do really need to thin them out. All right, you have your seedlings where they're growing. You've thinned them out. They're growing and doing well, and you're thinking it's getting to be spring, and I want to put them outside. Well, you have to be really ready to do this. And again, many springs we have are very cold, so sometimes we have to wait. But you want to harden them off. This is an extremely important part of seedlings. You've done a lot of work. You've babied these seedlings all this time. You don't want to lose them now by planting them too early. So you want to cut back on the water, and you want to put them outside for a couple of hours a day, out of the direct sun, maybe in some partial shady spot, out of the direct wind, when the outside temperature is at least 45 to 50 degrees. If you're doing tomatoes and peppers, you actually want to wait for at least 60 to 65 degrees. They do not like it cold. They'll just stop growing. You can use you can use cold frames. This is the simplest way to set up cold frames. This is just bales of hay stacked up and using windows. You can do that. Sometimes they get a little too warm in there, and you have to be careful with that, and they might scorch those seedlings. I personally do not use cold frames. I'm retired, so I can keep track of how the weather is going. So I set my plants outside. I'll set them for a few hours. I'll bring them in. And you want to keep increasing that. It takes a good 2 weeks to really get your plants, really hardened off. So some tricks of the trade. I mentioned the chamomile tea for the dampening off. I would keep a journal or some sort of planting calendar so you don't have to do all the math. Okay, I'm planting green beans, but when do I start those? And if you keep a planting calendar or a journal, it'll help you to know, okay, this. And I always keep track of what went well. So I started some lettuce, and I started this variety, and this variety did really well. So let me try that variety again next year. Or I worked on some green beans or cucumbers, and this brand from this catalog did not do so well. I need to pick something else. So you don't need all the bells and whistles. You don't need any fancy equipment. But I will stress again, spend your money on top-notch gardening media. All right, let's just talk about a few odd things here before we close. This is kind of a new product called seed tape. Sometimes seeds are really, really tiny. If you've ever tried to grow carrots, you can see by this picture, you can barely see the seeds of the carrots. These grow tapes, not only do they help you plant something in a straight line, which is very helpful, but you can easily separate these carrots are probably 4 to 6 inches apart, the seeds on the seed tape. So all you're doing is laying out the seed tape, covering it with soil, and just leave it. The seed tape will eventually dissolve and decompose, and your carrots will grow. It's always good to have a garden plan, to know where you're putting your vegetables or flowers or anything. That way you can rotate your vegetables, so you're not planting your vegetables all in the same spot. And one of the things I just absolutely love about starting seeds is to start from a seed and then harvest a vegetable. I just find that very fulfilling, and that's some of my favorite parts of gardening. So there's the fruits of your labor. This is not my house. This is some really beautiful garden. It's got vegetables, flowers, and your fruits of your labor are just harvesting and enjoying some delicious vegetables and beautiful flowers. I'm going to give a plug here for the Master Gardener and the Cooperative Extension Learn at Home series. This has been something that's been very successful from due to COVID. We had to go virtual, and we had a really hard time getting the word out about these kind of virtual presentations. So we started this Learn at Home series. Over 9,000 people watched these webinars in 2020. So that's a great resource. There's the email for the hotline, gardener@uri.edu. You have any kind of gardening questions, people at the hotline are there for you. So another thing that we have for a garden extension, if you have a really sick plant, we have the URI Plant Protection Clinic. We have a Rhode Island Native Plant Guide. We're really trying to push for people to plant natives to benefit the pollinators. I just heard a news report yesterday, as a matter of fact, that we're losing the Monarch Butterfly, and the Monarch Butterfly is in danger of becoming extinct. And there's a picture of some of my colleagues on the hotline. So you can contact us by phone, email, on the web. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and that's it. Anybody have any questions?
We do have a couple of questions. Vivian, thank you so much. I now realize every mistake that I made last year and why half of my seeds, and I spent a lot of time on them, didn't do anything. So thank you, thank you. This is most helpful. We have had a couple of questions, so I'm going to kind of ask them a little bit out of order. So if you did ask, don't worry, I will get to your question. But
you want me to stop sharing my video?
Actually, you know what, Vivian? It would be great if you could just go back to your last slide with the contact information and leave that one up. Yeah, that's perfect, because we've had some requests for that. So I love your idea about using a strawberry container to start my seeds. Somebody was asking, do you remove the humidity dome once the seedlings emerge, or when the first true leaves appear?
First, you want the first true leaves.
Okay, so they stay under that. And then should you use grow lights from the start, or only when the seedlings emerge?
When most seeds don't need light, so there's no need to use electricity when the seeds are in the growing media. But once the seedlings emerge, turn those lights on. Okay,
thank you. And how can you tell if a seed is too old? I mean, besides it not doing anything, is there a way to look at a packet? Do they usually have a shelf life?
So the packet will say will give a date. There will be a date on the packet.
Okay.
For instance, the packet I'm looking at is from 11/2019. So this is a little bit too old. When you buy seeds from a catalog, they're 2020 seeds. So they were harvested last year. These are a couple of years old. So all I would do, they're still good. Most seeds are good up to 4 or 5 years. You might want to just add a few extra, try starting a few extra just to make sure that they germinate. but they should be okay.
Okay. Somebody has a question. They found that when they start their tomatoes from seeds, that they had less issues with pests than the one that they bought from the garden center. And they're just wondering if you think there's any truth to that.
A lot of tomatoes depends on the variety. It depends on the variety. So you can buy certain varieties that are less attracting to pests. You also may be growing your tomatoes so well that they're, not having any diseases or, pest infestation. So kudos to you to not have a lot of pests on your tomatoes.
Do you need to do anything special to start onions?
So onions, you get your onion starts. They're like the miniature onion, and I've grown onions. Fresh onions are delicious. They're really a lot better than really onions you buy in the store. So no, you buy those as little onion starts, and yeah, you just plant them to the right depth, and yeah, they work great.
I have to say, fresh onions and fresh potatoes are two of my absolute favorite things to grow.
Yeah, potatoes, you just need a lot of space to grow potatoes.
Yeah.
Potatoes need space, but they grow really, really well in our rocky soil.
Max is asking that they've heard that harvesting of peat moss isn't environmentally sustainable. Do you have any thoughts or suggestions for a seed starter that doesn't contain peat?
Yes, so you can use cocoa coir. So it's COCOA, and then the second word is COIR, cocoa coir. So it's actually the outer loose casing of a coconut,
mm-hmm.
and that is sustainable. And that is a nice light mixture instead of using peat moss, and that's becoming more and more popular.
That's great.
I buy seed starter that's already mixed. I'm a little bit lazy about mixing my own, so I always just buy it already mixed.
Somebody has asked that they found that the hardening process to be very difficult, and they want to know, do you typically start more seeds that you need to account for any loss during the hardening off process?
Not usually. I usually just are much more aware of the hardening off process. So you want to take them outside. I'm really pretty particular. If it's going to be super windy, my seedlings are not going outside that day. They're just staying in behind the glass of the patio. They're not going in. They're not going outside. So I want to be up a little bit particular about, and if my hardening off process takes an extra week, so be it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Rather be safe than sorry when it comes to that. Somebody's asking if you can save the seeds from vegetables that you've grown and replant them the next year. Would that work?
Yes, there's a whole talk on that. You could schedule some in the fall, because that's like a whole process. The main thing is to make sure that you want to save seeds from mature plants, from mature fruits. So for instance, tomatoes, you have like the best heirloom tomatoes and you love them, and I want to save the seeds from them. So what you would need to do is have a tomato and really keep it on the vine extra long. You're not going to actually eat that tomato until it's like you want to have it a little bit past due where you would want to eat it, and those are the seeds you want to save.
I've done that with a few heirloom tomatoes, and it's so nice to have the same thing year after year.
My grandfather was like the king of seed saving. Before he passed away, I never really learned his tricks on seed saving. My grandfather never bought seeds. He always saved all his seeds, and he had them in files, and they were all organized, and he was amazing.
Christina is wondering if you have any recommendations on how often to turn over your soil in your outside planting beds, or how often you should rotate your crops within your planting beds?
I would say every 2 to 3 years, you should rotate crops. If you have the space, you just really want to, because certain, like say for instance, tomatoes. Tomatoes actually want quite a bit of calcium. So other plants that don't need a lot of calcium, if you switch those and switch places with them, and that will help. I always add a lot of compost. I just did a composting talk last night for another group, but adding a nice layer of compost every single year, a good 2 to 3 inches of compost in the fall. Turn that in slightly in the top layers. You just want to have really good soil. I highly recommend a soil test also. You want to make sure that your soil is nice and neutral. Most vegetables like a nice neutral pH, and they don't do as well with an acidic pH. And our soil tends to be pretty acidic in the state of Rhode Island.
Hannah is asking if you have any tips for growing hollyhocks. And Hannah, I actually have grown hollyhocks on my property, and they've done pretty well with not a lot of, maybe I was just lucky, but do you have any tips on hollyhocks, Vivian?
I've never tried to grow hollyhocks. I know they're a biennial, and you need to do that vernification to them if you're going to try to grow them from seed. To be honest with you, I've never really tried them.
Can you please just quickly go over what vernalization is again?
Sure. Let me get back to that slide here. It's the cooling of the seed or plants in order to accelerate flowering when it's planted. So, poinsettias are one of the best examples for that. You have to start them, but then they need a cooling off process once the plant is established.
Okay, thank you.
In order for them to flower, to really get a good flowering, they need that part.
Great. Okay. Somebody's asking, they're saying that they have had no luck starting lettuce from seed, and they're wondering if it's better to just plant the lettuce seeds outside.
That's totally up to you. Lettuce is a cool weather plant, so you can start it. It depends on how cold we have in March, but again, as long as it's not frost. So what kills plants in the cold? In cold weather, cold tolerant plants like lettuce, it's not the cold, it's the frost. Frost kills plants. So again, you want to start your lettuce outside. You want to direct seed, sow them. If you're going to put them directly in your garden, you need to have some hoop rings with some frost nets. If it's going to be cold, you have to cover them. So these frost nets work amazingly well. I spent several years working in a community garden where we grow vegetables all winter, no water, they're in a hoop house, but they're grown directly in the soil, but they have these hoops that go over and frost nets that go over the whole bed. And then overnight when it's very cold and the frost builds up on the frost nets, and during the day when it's warmer, the frost melts and waters the plants. It's actually quite a good system. If you're going to do containers, I have a lot of issues with bunnies, so I never plant lettuce in my garden. My lettuce is always grown in containers on my deck. I do start lettuce inside. I've not had any issues. I always have really good luck growing lettuce inside, and then I transplant them into bigger pots, and then I will cart them outside, cart them inside. It is kind of a pain, the hardening off, but to get them acclimated to being outside. But if it's gonna freeze, they gotta come in, or you have to have some sort of frost cover.
Okay. Just a follow-up on vernalization. How do you propose cooling off the seeds or the plant? The person who's asking, by the way, is in California with a temperate climate.
Ooh. Yeah. Well, see, we don't have any issues with cooling off in Rhode Island. I might have to ask that person to call their local extension agency. There should be a Master Gardener hotline. I don't know which university is the land grant university, but that I'm not sure.
Okay, thank you. Let me see. Sorry, my questions got away from me. Can you realistically replicate outdoor growing in a New York City apartment using only grow lights?
In the apartment, sure you can. Sure you can. I've talked to master gardeners that have done amazing things with grow lights. You have to have the warmth. So if you have the light, you have the water, and you have the warmth, yeah, absolutely. Try growing in containers.
And to the person that asked that question, if you're still joining us, we are looking to set up a container gardening webinar as well in the future with Vivian. Somebody is saying that they have saved seeds from squash, and those seeds that they saved produce very bland, almost flavorless squash. And just wondering what could be the cause of that.
That's a very good question. I have no idea. You would think that if you have one variety of squash and that squash produces seeds, you should have the same variety of squash.
Yeah.
That's I don't know the answer to that question. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Amy is wondering if you have any advice for okra. She planted small plants and got very little harvest out of it.
Okra is a very warm plant, so it really likes the heat. There's a reason why okra is grown in the South, and people love okra in the South because it doesn't do well in our cool climate.
Yeah.
It really needs, I mean, it needs a lot of heat.
Okay, that would make sense then. Do you recommend planting crop cover with seedlings?
I'm sorry, ask the question again.
Sure. They're wondering if you recommend planting cover crop with seedlings.
Planting a cover crop with seedlings. Interesting. Well, you would need to grow a lot of seeds for a cover crop. And I guess it depends on, I mean, cover crops usually do so well when you just directly sow. What kind of cover crop are they trying to put to grow?
I'm not sure, but if you did ask that question and you want to pipe in on either the Q&A or in the chat or let us know, I'll let Vivian know. The Amy who is trying to grow okra is located in North Carolina. So yeah.
There you go. Much warmer there. I don't really have a lot of experience with okra because, like I said, okra does not do well here.
Gotcha. Is it advised to use a heating pad for the entire seedling life cycle while they're indoors?
It's mostly for germination. They don't absolutely, if you put them if you have a warm enough, if you keep your house at like 60 degrees, tomatoes are not going to do that well. Then you might want to keep the heating pad on them. But, if you keep your house 68 degrees-ish, 70 degrees, if you have the lights kind of right on, just a few inches over them, they'll stay pretty nice and toasty.
Okay. We did have a question about one of our attendees is thinking of purchasing a greenhouse, and they were wondering if the Master Gardener Program has a class on the ins and outs of that. I did send them the link to the URI Gardener Program, but I wasn't sure if you knew offhand.
We do have some expert greenhouse people that is that a local person?
They didn't tell me. So,
Okay.
yeah.
One of the projects that I would steer them to is the Rhode Island Veterans Home in Bristol. Just installed a beautiful, very large greenhouse. They got a grant for it. And the leader of that project is John Toomey. He knows all about the ins and outs of purchasing and putting up and all the work that it takes to put in a greenhouse.
Okay. So if they wanted to ask, they could just reach out to the contact information that we see right now, and to inquire about greenhouses.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And a follow-up question is they're wondering if they would be able to grow vegetables all winter in that greenhouse. But I guess that's a
Well, again, it will depend how you're growing them.
mm-hmm.
And are you going to have a heat source? Are you not going to have a heat source? Are you going to heat your greenhouse or not?
Mm-hmm.
Like I was explaining in the community garden, those were just hoop houses. They're not heated, but
Yeah.
you can grow cool weather plants. You're not going to grow tomatoes in January outside unless you have a heat source.
Okay. That would be amazing if you could.
Yeah.
So we have no more questions, either in the Q&A or in the chat. So Vivian, thank you so much. This was very informative. I'm seeing a lot of feedback where people are just so happy that they were able to join tonight. If you have any questions, my email address is at the top of the chat box. Please feel free to reach out. Oh, we might have one more Q&A. Oh, just saying thank you. So Vivian, thank you again. And everybody, please keep your eye on your email. We will be sending out invitations to upcoming webinars and workshops. So thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful night. Goodbye.
Thank you. Katie, do you